Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you all here this evening. I have the great pleasure of introducing a very exciting book club event. The club is truly honored to host Dr. Bashabi Fraser, the CBE, the award-winning poet, children's writer, editor, and academic. I will hand over to our very own Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta. Dr. Banerjee Mehta needs no introduction. She wears too many hats for me to do justice to in this introduction. She is an academic, a literary columnist, and translator, and she also curates this club's, Bengal Club's book club. She will be in conversation with Dr. Fraser and before we open up the floor for an interactive session. Thank you. Over to you.
Wonderful introduction, short, pithy, and so generous. Thank you so much, Kasturi. This initiative is actually Mrs. Kasturi Khaitan's initiative. And though I have a great deal of interest and admiration for Professor Bashabi Fraser and her work, I must say I have not met Professor Fraser before. I only know her through her work. So thank you so much, Kasturi. On behalf of the Bengal Club, the Bengal Club's president, Mr. J.P. Khaitan, the chair of the library subcommittee, who is onward and upwards always, sitting right behind quietly as usual, Mr. Partho Ranjan Das, and on behalf of all of you, I would like to welcome Professor Bashabi Fraser. Professor Fraser, in this part of the world, in the academic echelons, as well as people who know Tagore will know her work, she is one of the diasporic stalwarts today we have out of the UK. And it is my great pleasure, Bashabiti, to welcome you and have a short conversation with you, and then we will open it up to the floor. This is a library subcommittee book club event. It is very special because our librarian Shebonti will correct me if I'm wrong, but Shebonti Sengupta, who is our very precious treasure at the library and at the Bengal Club, is it true, if I remember, we started the book club about 3 years ago? Yes. And our first book was another ecological winner, which was Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson. So we've had about... 7th of October 2020. Thank you for that. And it is quite ironic, actually, that we should be talking about habitat, we should be talking about the ecology today, because a few weeks ago, or was it a couple of months ago, Shebonti, that we had Ben Okri, the award-winning, some months ago, who talked about his new book, which won some awards in the UK, Hallelujah for Every Leaf. When I was reading the wonderful poems in this collection of Professor Fraser's, Ben came to mind. And I'm glad this is not a hybrid. I'm glad we have en-face exchanges today planned, because Ben actually surprised us on coming into our monthly discussion on his book. So with that, let me just very quickly give you the whole 9 yards. No, I'm kidding. That would take about a whole day, I think. But to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Bashabi Fraser, commander of the Order of the British Empire, award-winning poet, children's writer, editor, academic. She was declared an outstanding woman of Scotland by the Saltire Society in 2015. Bashabi has authored and edited 23 books, quite a litany, several academic, creative articles, and been widely anthologized as a poet. Her recent publications include Patient Dignity 2021 and Rabindranath Tagore 2019. She's the chief editor of the international peer-reviewed e-journal Gitanjali and Beyond. Bashabi is Professor Emeritus, Emerita, International, and I think more than anything else, she doesn't stand on airs and graces, and that's where I think her poetry appeals right across echelons, right across borders, and she is a global poet. She might be diasporic, but on to that a little later. First, I would like to read one poem by her called The White Page, which is dedicated to her husband, Professor Neil Fraser, whom we have the great pleasure and honor of having with us today. The forest calls out from its still center to the leaf of the book that came from its heart in the silent scream of a shared creative agony. The white space is like a still lake, undiscovered in an emerald grove. Its silence born from the depths of a forest from which it was torn. The screams of death, unuttered, but smoothed in our factories, gathered into pages, waiting to be ruffled, into ripples that will shatter the surface and reveal the secret of sighs of rustling leaves, the shooting desires of tendrils, the wisdom of the dark bark, and ambition of branches, waiting to find a voice to spill over and fill the white space. Bashabi, I remember reading Ragas and Reels. That was, I think, 2012, and Tartan and Turbans. Now, my first question to you, as a diasporic writer, one always thinks of the issues of nostos for utopos, which is nostalgia for the utopia. In your decades of being between ponds and puddles and connecting with your birthplace and what is now home, I don't see any fracture or fissure in this. What I see is that you have negotiated a space which is calm, maybe not completely calm, but comparatively a space of comfort. Can you talk about that journey?
Well, you put it so beautifully. You haven't made me fall between two stools, as Salman Rushdie would say. So I think I have, as a post-midnight child, I did not, like many of us here, experience colonization. So I think that was a bonus. And the kind of the angst that might have built up wasn't there. I went as a child to London with my parents, and my father was India's first Commonwealth scholar to Britain, and he was at the LSE, so was my mother. She got a scholarship there. And I started writing poetry there in London for their friend Julian Dakin.
So how old were you then?
7, and I... very bad poetry, only parents love it. But bad spelling as well. It was published in the Commonwealth Journal, and I got the Commonwealth Scholar Prize. Yeah, but it's very embarrassing because, as I said, even my bad spelling went into that. So I think that, you know, my parents were at LSE. I mentioned this because we were living in a place called Barnes in London, and LSE was miles away. So when I went to school with the landlady's two daughters, Donna and Jane, and when I came back, my parents were not there. They took a long time to come back. So I actually was welcomed into homes of my friends, and I played in their back garden. I would be fed by English mothers. Ours was the only brown family in that middle class area, and so I knew Londoners. I knew the English through their back gardens, through their kitchens, and so it was a kind of a child's paradise, you know. So I've never had that kind of feeling of being an alien there, and I think I didn't even know what my parents were doing. One of the neighbors told my mother, you know, Anima, we asked Bashabi, what are your parents doing in London? And I believe I looked very worried. I said, well, you know, in India, they were professors. But I think here they are just map makers. Because they had all their research maps spread out on the carpet. So I think that wasn't there. And then when I went back to do my PhD at Edinburgh University, once again, I think, again, we have had long links with Scotland within our family. Like my grandfather was educated by a Scotsman, and my parents were friends of Arthur Geddes, and it was a long link. And again, I think I felt quite at home. But India, I think I said it recently, and I say it again and again everywhere, that I might have left India, Julie, but India hasn't left me. Yeah. So I think I have no problems seeing the historical links which are positive. For example, Neil, he is embarrassed about empire, which has made the journey easy.
A lot of our British friends in Canada have always said that they are embarrassed about the Raj and what, you know,
absolutely,
that period.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think that is it. I feel quite comfortable. I have two homes. When I'm in Scotland, I defend India. When I'm in India, I defend Scotland.
Sure.
And so I never feel out of place. In Britain, it's quite interesting. Wherever I go, I'm the only brown person. Whether it's a big conference, a lot of the time. You know, how many English teachers are there in Britain? Very few. Urbi can tell you. So, but the thing is, Scotland has given me a lot. Given me my publisher, given me various awards, given me, well...
the headspace.
A headspace.
Virginia Woolf talks about.
That's a very good point. And I think my parents' liberal upbringing gave me the feminist confidence which I can carry with me to Britain and back again.
Wonderful. That's a really short and trenchant summary of what we were wanting to hear. You know, how you bridge the two homes. And both are homes for you, you know. That's the way people of the diaspora have to, negotiate their different identities, right?
Absolutely.
Now, you know, we've been talking about, if you remember, Dipesh Chakraborty, who comes to India at this time of year. There's a lot of talk about how this century, the 21st century, is the century of the Anthropocene, and how our greed has led to the rainforests being completely decimated, the warming of the polar ice, and you know, things along those lines. Now, when the COVID struck us, this book club was very especially formed, and the people who will be speaking later from the book club, I think, will want to know from you, as many authors have done, creative people, either in fiction or in drama or in theatre or in poetry, they have somehow been stirred and made dynamos to express what happened. Why did we get struck by the pandemic, and it was perpetually, definitely pointing towards this idea, the aspiration to have more, whether it's exotic meats on the table or, 5 luxury brands of handbags or shoes or whatever. So what was it during the COVID? And we assume that this was initiated during the COVID times.
Some of the poems, they definitely.
So can you tell us how what the COVID meant to you, and as a creative person, how did it emerge into Habitat?
Actually, I could go on listening to you forever rather than talking myself, because you have this very poetic way of, presenting things. I think what COVID for all of us remains a watershed. Okay, we say before COVID, after COVID. And though I'm not a great admirer of Macron, but at least he keeps the extreme right wing out of France, which is a good thing, I think. But Macron did say of Bolsonaro, thank goodness he's out of power now, that the forests in Brazil are not his. They're the world's, they are ours. So I think this is something that struck us, that, deforestation, buying up forests. I know that, the big-moneyed people in India are buying up the forest in places like Chhattisgarh, converting them into mining areas. And I think that's not the way forward. And we then realize that that's how the coronavirus escapes. We cannot play with nature. We need the trees. Rabindranath's Briksharopon has to come back again, one tree for one person if we have to live. So during COVID, actually, I was writing poems about COVID. And I didn't, my daughter Rupsha, who's a scientist, she rang and she said, Ma, today my little grandson, who's now 4, at that time he was going to be 1, she said he's taken his first steps. I said, wonderful. Amitale ishokar hata dekbo. And then I thought, lockdown, dekhte parbo na. So and it was quite interesting how he immediately recognized me on FaceTime, and he would dance for me and sing for me, and he was really performing for his Didai. So I think that sort of made me realize how fragile life was. And I wrote poems in a volume called Patient Dignity. And that came out in 2021. And I collaborated with an artist friend, also an Indian, who lives in Edinburgh. And she did the paintings. It's a beautiful book because of the paintings. And I think both Vibha, Pankaj, and I kept our sanity through COVID times, through creativity. I think writers and artists are the voices of society, and all I can say is that they speak for everyone. And creativity helped us to keep our sanity during those difficult times.
Absolutely. I think all of us would agree that, even the aftermath of the COVID, which has stayed with some of us clinically, and we find people who are about in their 40s or even 50s. The age for being affected by COVID has had a much bigger spectrum than we originally thought. So some young people are writing now of their experience and their thoughts during the COVID. Bashabi, can I ask you, when you started to speak about your grandson, it triggered a question in my mind. What is it that sparks the thought of a poem in you? For example, Michael Ondaatje would say, if I remember, he thought of the English Patient when in his mind he was going to bed one night and he thought of a nurse speaking to a patient. And that's how the English Patient came to be. With you, how does the imaginaire work? Does it work in visual images? Does it work with a song? How does it work?
Um, it works with an idea that disturbs me, and I carry a poem with me for a long time, and then in the middle of the night, I'm lucky if it comes. And that's when it gets onto the page. So all my, on the one hand, anger at what is happening in the world, like wars, or feeling disturbed about COVID, not being able to see my over 90, or now he's 92, my father, and that kind of anxiety. And I think writers write from anxiety. They are disturbed into writing, just as artists are. And that's why I said they're the voice of a society.
I think in your earlier book, I can't remember which one, and in your various interviews, you've talked about the empowerment of women, which is important to you. But I remember Gayatri Spivak in this very building coming and telling us 2 years ago that our sisters in Europe and in America have very different demands about feminism and women's rights, and we have a very different demand. Would you agree with that, and would you like to tell us a little bit more about how you feel about the issue of women's rights in India and where is it going?
Well, I think for a long time, Western feminists assumed that especially the second wave and third wave of feminism, they assumed that they had a theory. Geraldine is sitting right here; she'll be able to tell you a lot more about one theory fits all, but it doesn't. So Spivak and Mohanty and Brinda Nabar, various people have come forward and shown us that there's more than one truth, there's more than one reality. I think Indian women, we can't generalize. I feel that there are too many Indias to generalize about India. India's so varied, so the difference in between the urban and the rural spaces, between states, between class, and of course the whole question of caste. But I right now I have a PhD student who's completing her PhD on Rabindranath's novels and the women's position in them, and she has shown how. And of course, we're talking about a different era, how women in the Ondar Mahal, in the Bhadralok's houses, were actually worse off than those who were free outside to go out and work. And I think that has been something that we really need to remember. We don't have to feel that only privileged women are happier. Happiness is something very different. For me, feminism across the board is that if women still do not have access to education and financial independence, feminism isn't over. And that's it.
I think that's wonderful because for some strange reason that perhaps Professor Forbes or you might be able to point us in the right direction, this is the fourth time that I've heard of someone, a young scholar, who's interested in the Ondar Mahal and
the Bahir Mahal.
And the Bahir Mahal. And there is a young, very young, outstanding student at Rutgers, Shuddhadeep Mukherjee, who is talking about exactly this. And, Sharala Shundari, Rosha Shundari, these are women that we owe so much to.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
A century ago. So from this, what leads me to ask you is that we've talked about ideas of feminism and ideas of how the idea of difference and where you stand. Can we just shift gears and go to race? Now, you were talking about, very interestingly, that when would you have gone as a 7-year-old? I'm just trying to figure out, do my math. In the 50s, early 50s?
A little later, in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Yeah.
Even then, things were kind of my mother would have been a student in England at that time, and she would have told me about the same, that she never felt any racial slurs. She was a fellow at the Royal College, so she was studying to be a doctor. Now, how do you see yourself? How do you identify yourself today in Scotland as a brown Mem Sahib or a brown woman?
I'm
You're not a Mem Sahib.
I'm not a Mem
So
Sahib,
as
no.
as a brown woman.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm quite. I like the brown color.
Yes.
I'm so glad I am brown. So, and my daughter says the same, though she is far lighter than me. And I find this obsession with color in India. We forget that we are a brown nation, and then we say "Fosha mein chai." I just find it absolutely absurd. Why don't they go to the West and marry them? So I think in Britain, I think I'm privileged because I stay in middle class areas. I'm part of the university fraternity. I'm a writer there. I'm a Royal Literary Fund Fellow, which is a national selection. So it's quite. I have a privileged position, but I have worked in the community for 2 staggered years, and I have seen how disempowered women can be without the confidence of language and education. And the problem in Britain is that if you don't know English, they assume you are stupid. And if you have, I have seen going with women to a hospital and the doctor calling her Mrs. Begum. And then I have to tell him Begum means Mrs. So don't call her Mrs. She has a name, call her Miss, Hamida Begum or something. And then he will say something in English, and if she can't understand, he will he will say it's, your mother's a doctor, so you would know. He would say it slowly and loudly and more loudly and more loudly. So that's the way my grandson speaks. Anyway, more loudly. So that's a problem I've seen. The other thing is, once, for example, when Syrians came, people just assumed they were refugees with nothing.
Yes.
But Syria was a highly educated, secular country, and the people there were professionals. And just because they didn't know English, they assumed that they were, not equals.
Not up to the mark.
Yeah, not equals, not up to the mark. So I think my privileged position makes me sensitive and aware of those who are not. So, but I can, if a policeman stops me, I can say, what is it? And then they say, no, you seemed unsure. I said, no, I wasn't. You came in front of me and you were beeping. So I can say that because I have the power of language. When I go through airports, I know I'm brown. It will beep, they will search me. And when they say that it's just random, I tell them it's not random, but fine, you can search me. So I think there's a kind of imbalance in things. Racism exists in Britain. I have had to fight it. It hasn't been an easy struggle. I think I was the first professor of English literature in Britain, but it hasn't been easy. And now it's lovely to see so many confident brown people in academic positions. But I think doctors led the way. Britain needed doctors in the 60s.
Yes.
So every second person had a GP who was Indian. Or when I say Indian, I mean the subcontinent. I have no enmity with Pakistan or Bangladesh.
Asia.
South Asia, exactly. So I think another thing I must tell India, however much we rejoice when we win cricket over Pakistan, in Britain we are South Asians. We're not Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi. And that's it. And I identify myself with them. And I'm welcome in their shops, in their restaurants. And that's where I feel quite at home. And I speak Urdu because I speak Hindi.
How lovely. Yeah.
So we have communication.
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's a bit of a bittersweet pill, if I may say. And I do think, just going back to Spivak, that the subaltern can speak and can have a voice and does have a voice and is not silenced. We
Here,
have
here.
never been silenced.
Here.
We will speak.
It would be kind of neglectful of me not to ask you about your views about. Well, it certainly proves. The question I'm going to ask you proves that things have changed in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think of the Rishi Sunak syndrome? Is it going to, be louder and louder in the next few decades?
Yes. Well, I'll just give you one example of what Rishi Sunak has recently done. He has given money to the national grid, extra money, so that his private swimming pool can be heated. And he has closed 450 public swimming pools at the same time.
It's not going to make him very popular.
Well, this government, the present government, is busy closing libraries, public libraries, sports centres, and swimming pools, where the elderly go, where people with cancer go and do aerobics and things like that. So, for me, I think we need to breathe again in Britain.
For sure.
In our public spaces, in our sports halls, in our parks and gardens, and in our libraries.
For sure. Pulling you back now into Habitat, in a pre-event little meeting that we have in our book club, one thing that came a cropper was that Bashabi Fraser is an organized thinker, whereas many poets are not, they are all over the place. So I said, why do you think so? So the general answer is that you have managed to corral your really wonderful ideas. The birds speak. You have the rivers, which reminds me certainly of the power of the indomitable in the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come to gather all these wonderful ideas, these poems, and did you think of poems to do with owls and birds and blackbirds, put them together, and then went on to rivers, and then went on to other things, or even what you dedicated to, or thought of with your friends? How did you manage to put Habitat together? A lot of us who are interested in the poet's mind would love to know.
Well, I'm glad it looks organized. I think, my mother was a climatologist, and I've been worried about the climate and climate change for a long time. So I've been writing poems on forests and rivers. I think you also are thinking of my epic poem From the Ganga to the Tay, and I write about rivers from time to time. But what amazed me was that we live in urban spaces. Well, I think I'm a city girl. I love the country, but I need my book festivals. I need my libraries. I need my galleries and museums. So, but we share. It's not just an urban scape with people and shops and schools and colleges, but there are creatures there, and we share the space with them. So that's where I realize that they are there with us, whether they're owls or peacocks shipped in from down south, not from India, or blackbirds or crows. I know a lot of people don't like crows, but I love crows. I think they're extremely intelligent birds, sparrows, and so we share the world. This is their habitat as well as ours. And there's there was a time when there were no starlings coming back to England, and we were really worried, where have the starlings gone? Then one day our car broke down because, anyway, we had no petrol, and all the petrol stations seemed to be closed. And while we were waiting for the AA to come and pick us up, we suddenly saw a whole host of starlings they were back again. So, it's those kind of moments that prompt poetry. And we've had cats, by the way. And I've always loved animals. So if I had the money and had the energy, I would have had a menagerie in my house. But I didn't manage it. So I do it in my poetry. But I am worried about big dams in India, about deforestation across the world, about the lack of biodiversity when we convert cropland to commercial crops, like, for growing soya and sunflowers.
Or genetically manufactured.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it worries me more than anything else.
Well, I think what the points you've made through your poems about biodiversity and sustainable development and sharing the space with even little critters. In a strange way, it reminded me of an unusual connection. And I wonder how you would figure this out. An Englishman in exactly 100 years ago, E.M. Foster.
Oh,
and I remember, what was her name? Anyone in the audience, or even Bashabi, who came to visit in Passage to India, and who looked at a gecko and said, "Poor little darling, he has a right to be in my bedroom as well." I can't for the life of me remember, but it was Ronnie's mother.
She was a sensitive being.
Choitali, are you looking it up for me? Yes.
Mrs. It'll come back.
It'll be Mrs. I can't. It's with M.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, I think that's what comes through very simply in Habitat. So shall we turn our attention to three of our book club members first, and then open it up to the floor. I'm so glad we had a tight conversation, but it didn't go meandering. I thank you for that, Bashabi, because it's like pulling teeth sometimes, Thank you. Choitali, Dr. Choitali Moitra, will you tell us what you feel first about Habitat?
I'm sorry to use this, madam. It's been a privilege reading your poems. I was looking at the poems, particularly from the bunch you call The Distant and the Near. And these poems do not share the same locale, but they create a landscape that is elemental, I could see. I'll just tell you the names of a few poems that sort of stuck to my mind. The Tiger Country, The Storm, The Sea Which Sustains, Kills and Seals and Shags at Plockton Firth. So any sort of special reason, and also poems like Everest and On the Shore, where you remember special people like Kenny Munro or Alan Riash, respectively. Any reason for that, please?
Tiger Country is the Mohana Desh, the Sundarban. And the tiger completely changes her character because of the salt water and fresh water mingling and not being able to trace his footsteps to his lair, and the mangrove forests. So that has always fascinated me. And I think Amitabh Ghosh does it very well in The Hungry Tide. How the tide takes everything. So that has fascinated me. The changes that are dramatic, islands appear, islands disappear. Sandheads appear, and then you plant, and then you can't harvest because everything has gone with the tide. So those kind of things, Tiger Country. You mentioned the storm. The storm, I find that quite a timeless thing, because I was reading about a storm in Scotland when everything changed. It was a huge flood caused by a storm, and the destruction was tremendous. And then we have had storms in India, and then we have had these cyclones and tufans, Amphan. And so it's a universal problem, and that's why the images keep moving. The sheep and are not in India, and yet they're there. And there are lots of images that are from both countries, both parts of the world. So Everest is melting. It's not just the North Pole and the South Pole. If we allow Everest to melt, the whole Gangetic Plain will flood, and we won't live, and our grandchildren won't see the end of the century. So it is worrying. Pluckton. I was there for an author event, and it was quite interesting. I don't know if you've seen shags. They're very strange birds. They look like vultures, and once they're in the water and they're out again, they put their wings out to dry. and they, unlike us, they share those islands with the seals, and they have no problems coexisting. And Alan Rioch sees that kind of similarity. Kenny Monroe, I did the Gonga Tute with Kenny. Yeah, so what else did you mention? Those are the ones. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of friends prompted a lot of the poems, in this book. Yeah, experiences with them. Mm-hmm.
Anasuya Paul, a very voracious reader and critique.
Congratulations again on your book, Bashabi. It's been a lovely read. And this is another of the books that have come out of the lockdown, like Julie was mentioning. And the theme has been a reflection over man's abuse of nature. And that has come out in perhaps all the books that we've done so far. In yours, I was particularly touched by the ones about the rivers. And just as Chaitali just mentioned, there were books, poems dedicated to certain friends of yours. So thanks for that answer, even that was on my list. I was touched by A Lonely Race, and the one which came later, near and far, in that Let Me Be, which was dedicated to the memory of Martin Luther King. So in both you used water, and it kind of touched a kind of feeling in me that it was the feminist spirit surviving against odds and making its way forward in spite of all the obstacles that may come, and prevailing in spite of it all. And so if you could just say something about what prompted A Lonely Race. It's a short and very beautiful poem, and I could read it, A River's Journey. Why don't you read it? It would be nice to hear it from you.
In Scotland they say we. A lonely race. A river's journey is long and lonely. Like the veteran long-distance runner, a challenge from start to finish, an adventure at every ripple of my flow. I have no consort or companion, no mother's arms, no siblings' rivalry. I am a witness through time. I revel in reminiscence and reflection. I mirror heaven's fury and kindness. I salute panoramic vistas. I lash past every urban sprawl and lap round humble villages. I am a solitary meanderer, journeying to my finishing line, which does not make me a champion, but swallows my singular identity in a churning burial ground of eternal oblivion.
Well, I can't remember, but La donna è mobile. So the woman is like water. She slips through and she will not be dominated. Thank you so much.
In fact, when I was reading this and I was discussing with Julia, thought went through my mind that in India, rivers are named after women, barring the Brahmaputra. That's the only male river. And so.
They are also Damodar not.
Damodar Nod. Okay.
It is the feminine, then it could be like Ganga.
Yes.
But I think the names of rivers they're beautiful. I mean,
Yes.
my parents come from East Bengal, and I think of names like Dholeshwari, Karnapuli, Godavari is down south. Yes, so I just Rupnarayan. I mean, they're so poetic.
They're very
We love our
poetic.
rivers.
Yes.
We're in love with our rivers. We're a romantic nation. We know what they mean to us.
There's a lot of poetry in all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that why it is Rupsha? Yes, exactly. I actually named her Rupsha. I named another little girl Bipasha, and I named another little girl Tista, because their parents asked me to name them.
Okay, so Dr. Harish Mehta, who's just finished a book of poems on Vietnam, which is his area of research. Can we hear your feedback?
Thank you. I enjoyed your book immensely. And once you've done your poem, you leave it, and then as a reader, I draw the poem in. And when I drew in some of your poems, I thought that that each of them has an obvious interpretation, the one that you intended, and then possibly a less obvious one is how the reader takes it, having drawn it in. I don't know if this was in your mind, that the poem Robin is about this migrant. The robins come when it's warm, and then they fly south, from Canada to, at least some of them started staying back in Mississauga. So, is the robin, did you ever think of the robin when you wrote the poem as a Yemeni or a Syrian refugee? I'm just, because when I read it, there's an obvious reading and then there's a less obvious one.
Sorry for butting in here, but I can't help myself. This is so typical of us in the academy, isn't it? Yeah. The post-colonial has to come in. Is it a Yemeni? Is it always? We're always
No,
thinking.
it's not always. It's a poem being sort of deconstructed. I mean, I would hate a poem to be deconstructed. You write a beautiful piece of work, and who am I to ask you, is it a Yemeni? Is it a migrant? Mm-hmm. So that's one. The second is, when you sort of write all these wonderful poems, and especially on nature, are you coming from nature per se as a pure entity out there waiting to be described? Because a lot of your poems are observations. Or do you come into it out of anger? Do you see this great rape of the nature going on? And then, so some of these things. And of course, now, as just another third thing is just a small comment on how we've got this thing called eco-poetry, which seems to be one of the evolving fashions of the moment. Mm-hmm. In the 5th century in China, there was nature poetry being done beautifully. Mm-hmm. There were haikus being written in Japan very beautifully. Mm-hmm. And lately there's Sichuan is a young Chinese poet who's done a poem, if I can quote just a line from that. He says, trees eavesdrop on trees. Birds eavesdrop on birds. A viper startled attacks a passing human, and it becomes human.
Very powerful.
So this is a lot of very good work going on eco poetry, nature poetry, mm-hmm. and I didn't, of course, shouldn't neglect Langston Hughes. Mm-hmm. He also has some very, very good eco poetry, nature poetry, in which he uses nature as a device in which he conflates the destruction of nature by the white man with the racialized policies that the African American faced. There's a way to do that too. So thank you so much.
So your question was, there are lots of migratory birds in my book, and I'm glad you picked up my little robin. And the robin redbreast, I mean, I still remember the robin from my childhood days. And I feel that when all the winter birds sleep or hibernate, or, well, they go away, the robin is very loyal, it stays. And we have a huge hedge, which we didn't plant, round our house. It's kind of, it's very British. It shuts out the rest of the world. So, and that's where the robins stay. So I think of the robin as like sparrows, that whenever there are robins in Britain or sparrows there and here, I feel at home, right? And that's why I feel at home with crows as well, even if they're not migratory. But I'll tell you a story. I did my master's in Jadavpur, and there was a girl, a junior girl. I was doing my master's, and she was an undergraduate, and she was talking to somebody. And then I realized they were two crows, and she had names for them. And they had, she said, "Oh, eshecho tumra, ebar to beshi shomoy laglo," and they came from Jalpaiguri. So she said that after every vacation, they came to Jadavpur, and when she went back, they went back. As the crow flies. Wow. They took 2 or 3 days, but they did go. So I think I do feel birds like us migrate. Yes, they could be Yemeni, and I actually I'm actually quite grateful that the reader reads between the lines and finds fresh meaning, because that's what writing is about. It's about communication. And poetry shouldn't say everything, should leave something for the reader. So I'm glad you read something more in it and find the significance which I didn't voice always, because poetry is about metaphoric meaning and multiplicity of meaning. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, very much so. Because some of these poems to do with animals and birds are quite sad in that they're suffering due to so many factors, man-made factors, that man's depredations are always there. Mm-hmm. You know, they're happening not so much between the lines, but they're quite obvious, unstated sometimes. Mm-hmm. And therefore, to think of the bird as a Syrian refugee, mm-hmm. Doesn't take a huge leap of imagination. Yeah, but it does take some.
Actually, while you were both speaking, I was thinking of Roland Barthes and mm-hmm. his idea of the death of the author with the birth of the reader. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So really, that's what poetry is supposed to do, right?
Yeah, I always started with that with my creative writing classes, that, you know, the author was not dead, but just elsewhere. And I just want to add one more thing. There are some funny poems in the book, because the cats and the birds have a sense of humor as well. So I hope you enjoy the poems, the humor as well as the sadness. I mean, the sadness will be there because we are all anxious about what's happening around us. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's my great pleasure to open the floor, and let's have the first question from any of you. You know, speak now or forever hold your peace, because you're not going to get Bashabi, Fraser in a hurry. So go ahead, please.
It's wonderful to meet and hear you, Bashabidi. Out of all your works that I have been following closely, one poem that has stayed with me is Duke, which you had written for your 13-year-old daughter. Okay, and as you were speaking about LSE and all, you know, I suddenly felt so privileged as a mother, because my daughter is also a LSE graduate. Okay, now, what were the thoughts at that when you wrote the poem? I'm just curious, a bit curious, because it comes, or it gives a silent message to all the readers. You know, I'm just curious to know that.
Well, I think thank you for mentioning that poem. My daughter was 13, the story. What happened was we were in Paris and we're in a hotel lounge, and she was sitting at another table with 3 young men who were trying to chat her up. And I thought, oh, she's grown up. You know, they find her attractive. Ooh, you know. So, and the World Cup was going on, so they asked her, what if Scotland played England? Whom would she support? She said Scotland. The Scots don't pronounce T's, so hence, you know, the lack of the T, Scotland. And if England played India, India. And if England played Germany, Germany. And then they said, what if Scotland and India played? And then she was having some fruit juice. She put it down. She shrugged her bare shoulders, turned away, saying, "Don't care." So, you know, I think that's how I feel. Neil and I, if England and India are playing, we're happy for whoever wins, sad for whoever doesn't, and we don't watch the television when the match is going on. Because
Very
it's
wise, very wise.
too anxious. I think you had a question, did you?
Saheli, and what about Gautamda? You too? Yes. Saheli first and then Gautamda.
I know Bashabi since the IPPL days, and I'm a great fan of yours. I mean, and of course your poetry as well. Now, as a student of environmental science, I do wish to know from you, because you were talking about climate change and all, how do you think that your poems or whatever you write, maybe short stories, or maybe all over the world what people are writing, how can that affect and bring out to the fore the concept that we are the ones as humans on this planet, because we are also part of the animal kingdom. Though we claim ourselves to be the rational animal and the highest and all, but there have been several animals and birds and different species that are still there existing, but they came before us. Down the evolutionary chart, if we see that they came before us, but we are making them into endangered species. Some of them are also wiped out from the face of the world. Many are wiped out. So, and that's because of us, because we have killed them. We have overexploited them. Now, my point is, I just want to know from you that, like you spoke about the Mount Everest melting, do you think that we are overexploiting Mount Everest with a line and a row and a queue of, trekkers going up just to say that we have climbed the Mount Everest? So how can we stop that? Through poetry, do you think, is it possible?
Well, I wish poetry could change the world, but that is a sad thing. But I do feel that if we can still be moved to find a to-go song for every emotion, every occasion, I hope we can relate to good poetry, and also poetry that is alert to the world. Yes. But I think, I don't know, poetry can do a lot. In South Africa, when the anti-apartheid movement was going on, the miners who were black were not allowed to sing, right? So they found a boot language. So with their boots, they had poetry, rhythm, and that was it. Right through the forests of Africa, when the slavers came, they had drums beating, the drum language, to say they're coming, run away. So poetry reflects the rhythm of life, and poetry has the power of words. And all of us as human beings share one thing, the power of language. So I hope poetry can help to stir us into thinking and maybe into action.
Remarkable point, actually, Saheli, because the other day when we were talking, I remembered Percy Bysshe Shelley, who had said, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Very powerful.
Yeah, and I think, Bashabi, other than poetry, we would also love to see some short stories coming out from you. if it's possible. Because, see, elements of nature, even for Happy Prince, the swallow, that had such a big, like imagery impact. When I was a child, when I read, even O. Henry's Last Leaf.
Yeah, there's a one. I'm glad you mentioned that. There's one book I would urge everyone to read, and The Man Who Planted Trees. It's a French long short story, and people thought it was real, and it was about a shepherd who just went everywhere and planted trees, planted seedlings, like Rabindranath Vriksharopon, and then the whole climate changed there, and the river started flowing. The leaves came, the birds came back, the butterflies came back, and biodiversity. And everybody wanted to know who this man was. And they went to this place thinking it was real, but it wasn't. But I think a story can do just that. It sort of had a great effect on the transition movement. Thank you for that question, yeah.
Yes, Gautamba. Please go ahead.
My question is a little bit different, not related to poet. But we often tend to portray the British as a villain. Most of the Indians have the feeling, I've seen, they colonized us and they have looted all our wealth. But very few people of India, I think, they have acknowledged what the British has given to us. The language you speak now, that is the gift of the British. And the Habesi society is more liberal than ours. Even in India, we'll find there will Bihari hai, Punjabi hai, even in India also, the kind of racial or such kind of discrimination that we have. And British, I still feel that what they have given to us, I think to us means whether it is democracy, whether it is our railway system, whether it's the judiciary, and what they have taken from us, I think what they gave us much more than what they have taken from us. So do you acknowledge that thing? Because Shoshidra always used to say in the parliament, they have looted our country and they have made us so poor, and that time our per capita was so low. So do you think that what the plus minus the British has given to us and what they have taken to us is something very huge difference?
Well, everyone wasn't Clive. He didn't fill. Everyone didn't fill 100 ships and take the wealth of Siraj-ud-Dawla to Britain.
But that's more tangible, intangible.
But I think, Gautam, I think my answer will be quite complex. I don't believe that anyone should be colonized, that anyone should rule anyone else. So I think colonization is wrong because you always take the wealth of one country for the other. But there were a lot of good, there weren't enough jobs, for example, in Scotland, yet the Scots were highly educated. So India was a career, as Tancred says, and in Tancred. But so a lot of them were good people who came to do a good job because they were just doing a job, and they did it with dedication. So I think there were a lot of good men on the ground, and at the end of the day, I think Shelley says it very well in Ozymandias, that the tyrant is never remembered. He lies with his head lost from the rest of the statue in the desert, forgotten. But those who do good, like we were coming here, and there was Ronald Ross Shoroni. So Oder Amra Shorone Rakhi. I have a book called, which I haven't done alone. I have done the narratives. I've translated the lyrics from Bangla into Ingreji. Following the couplets, the rhythm, everything. And it's called Scots Beneath the Banyan Tree, Stories from Bengal. And these were Scots who are forgotten in Scotland, but remembered in Bengal. So, so I think there were a lot of good people on the ground, and I meet them all the time. And my own teacher was Kitty Schooler Dotto, and she was a wonderful woman.
She was my Professor Jadavpur.
Yes, so she was mine too.
Excellent.
So, and I'm in touch with her in Oxford. We go to see her pretty regularly. Another person whom some people here might remember is Margaret McGregor, Reverend Margaret McGregor, the first woman presbyter of the Church of North India. So, these kind of people did a lot of good. And if we look at the Bengal Renaissance, there were a lot of Scottish Orientalists. And actually, we have a book and the introduction I have written, and my theory is that the Bengal Renaissance gained a lot, and the Scottish Orientalists had a huge influence, especially the Unitarian Church and various things from America and Britain. I think there is a positive side to it, but I think colonization is not the way. I'm quite sure that the good that happened was for because of individuals, not because of policies.
I don't think the democracy and all this postal system, it is the basis of the only one individual. It is the
the people.
the people. I think that is the ruler.
Yeah,
They
and no, I agree with you that I'll tell you one thing. When I was in Edinburgh, we had one teacher who was actually very sweet, and whenever she couldn't answer a question, because a lot of them were international students who were actually doing masters, I was doing a PhD, and they were all English teachers from across the world. And then we'd say, "Oh, native English speakers don't say that." And it was almost like putting them down, and she didn't have an answer. So people wrote a letter and said, especially the former British colonies, Nigeria and India and Pakistan and all that, for us, English was our, one of our languages. In some countries, it is the language. And because I was a PhD student and also a teacher, I wasn't part of that letter writing or petition. The teachers called me and they said, "What do you think, Bashabi?" I said, "I think you have to recognize one thing, and that is, colonization didn't bring a lot of good, took a lot of our dignity away, but English was a gift. And if you give a gift, don't take it back. It is ours now." So they loved that answer. And that sort of stopped that whole debate. Yeah. So I think one of the gifts was English. And I must say I wouldn't have met Neil and married him if it wasn't for English and my love of English literature.
That's great.
So there you go. Someone else, please? Yes. Almas first and then Kabiri, please.
Bashabi, I really loved your book, but which is your favorite poem out of it?
It's like asking a mother,
favorite child.
Which of your children do you love most?
That's a very difficult one. I think there are many which are very funny, and I think I like them. There's one that is about a battery. There's one that is about a battery hen, and that is one of my favorites. If there had been time, I would have read it. It's quite funny, but it's a true story. It really happened in our house. Yeah.
Yes.
This is actually to continue Gautam Das' argument. I think I would like to differ. The British didn't give us English to do English literature.
No, that's true.
So I think
I'm not talking about literature. I'm talking about language.
My thing was, I think he did not understand what we were capable of.
Yeah.
He gave us the language, and we wrested it from him and made it our own.
From Macaulay.
So I think Macaulay wasn't aware of our capacity of taking something.
Yeah. Kabiri, I think bingo, because I'm thinking of Kantapura, and Raja Rao would be so proud of you. We must do with English what the Americans have done with it. Must make it our own in our own voice. Something like that.
Absolutely. I think still I do think they didn't realize it was a gift.
No, they didn't realize.
They didn't realize, and they thought they would create brown sahibs to rule, to be their proxies in governance and everywhere, and be the clerks of colonial India.
Well, if I might just chip in again, this is an area, as I said, post-colonialism is sort of, it's sort of punctured into our brains. Can't think without it. Chinua Achebe, right? The guy who won the Nobel, and Mbembe, who is the current flavor of the years. They were always fighting because Achebe said, we will have to use English, as Bashabi and Kabirdi and all of us are saying, and Raja Rao in 1936. So, we make it better, we make it our own. Mbembe, being the new stalwart, is pushing the envelope and saying, we should get rid of English in our departments. So, Achebe's answer, the wise man, older man says, do you really think your colonial masters will learn your language? If you want to write back to your colonial master, you have to use the language they understand. You can't be speaking caterpillar language to butterfly people. So here you are. I think English was a great gift, but it was not charity that did it, right?
Yeah, it's as you said, if I may use a post-colonial term, appropriation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have appropriated it, yeah.
We have time for one more question. Would anybody like to? Please go ahead.
Hello. I just have one comment. It's not a question, but as Dr. Fraser has talked about several birds in her poems, it reminds me of a wonderful poem written by Taslima Nasreen decades back, which was published in Desh Potrika. The title of the poem was Bhumodya Sagorer Seagull, the seagull of the Mediterranean Sea, where while the poetess was in exile in Europe, she expressed her keen desire to return to her homeland in Bangladesh, while she knew very well that it was an impossible wish. But how wonderfully she had expressed the seagull as a medium of a communication, to communicate with her readers, when she writes, Bhumodya Sagorer Seagull, একদিন খুব ভোরে চুপে চুপে কেউ জানবে না নেবে আমাকে আমার এই ভূমধ্য সাগর থেকে আমার বঙ্গোপসাগরে একদিন. How wonderfully she expresses her desire to return to her homeland.
Yeah, I will answer with a little limerick which is not in the book. The seagulls have now left the sea and live in our city. And instead of fresh fish, their favorite dish is ketchup with chips for their tea.
They're all around McDonald's.
Thank you, everyone. You've been a marvelous audience, wouldn't you agree? Bashabi, we're all your, we adore you. So that came through very well. Thank you again for being here with us. Kosturi Khaitan is the person who has initiated this. Thank you again. And it is my great pleasure to now call upon the architect of this city, who is the chair of the library subcommittee, Mr. Partharanjan Das.
If you allow me, I'll start with two small stories which is related to what Dr. Bashabi Fraser has said and what was your question. We have almost forgotten the name of Bishop. There's a road in his name in Bihala, James Long. Yes. Bishop James Long taught himself to, learn and read Bengali fluently. When Dinabandhu Mitra wrote his book and his play on the indigo farmers and how they were tortured here, that was banned. Bishop James Long decided that he will translate the book and publish and sell it in England. Whereby, once he did it, he was jailed and he was fined. He did not have money. And Kali Prashanna Singh, also, a well-known author, who actually owned this building, owner of this building. When Bengal Club had the other building facing Chaurangi, Kali Prashanna Singh paid the fine because James Long did not have the money. But he did have the courage to translate and, print and distribute Dinabandhu Mintro's Neel Dorpan. The other story I want to say is, how poetry becomes part of our integral life. I was doing a project in Amber, which was the old capital of Rajasthan before Jaipur was developed. In Amber, they have a large number of factories where small children are weaving silk carpets. And there is one person conducting the entire process, and these children are not really educated, and the patterns are quite intricate. So I asked the person who was in charge that how do you tell them what to weave? He said it's very interesting. I have written a poem which they know by heart, and there are 4 stanzas, but there are different tunes for the same stanzas. If I sing the stanza with a tune, let's say A, then they know the pattern will be this with this color scheme. But if I sing the same stanza with a different tune, they know that the pattern will remain the same, but the color will change. So this is how poetry can. It is still there. But we need to document these things in India. We don't. They are gradually dying out because children are not allowed to.
But child labor is not bad.
Child labor. I said, why? Why do you engage children? He said that look at the nimbleness of their fingers. There are also older people weaving the carpets, but the carpets woven by their children are much better in quality. So there you are. Anyway, thanks to Dr. Fraser for giving us this wonderful evening. Thanks to Julie for conducting it. Thanks to Kasturi. Please bring us more like Dr. Bashabi Fraser so we can have this wonderful evening. And thanks to you. I know this is not an ideal venue. We are converting one of our rooms into something which we can call our own for our lectures and talks of our library subcommittee. But till such time, we have to make do with spaces like this, which is a restaurant. Thank you. I will request our First Lady to please come and offer the speaker something as a token of our appreciation. Somehow we'll bring it, don't worry.
Can I say Kusturi is also tangentially related to it? Wow. Yeah, and so through my Chotu Mama, and I don't call her Mama
She's
because she's younger than me.
She's related to me as well.
And also she herself is an artist.
Oh,
a designer.
wow.
Yeah.
You have to face the camera, please. Yes. Thank you. Wonderful. Another for Julie for conducting this program brilliantly. Thank you, everybody.
One apology. I read my poem with Julie's glasses. I was wondering why I couldn't see properly.
I have one more little thing to say to you all. Shush, quietly. I hope we have no one overhearing us. But we have copies of Bashabi's book, and secretly, 1,000 rupee book. She is giving it to us for 500 because discount. If you want a copy, just let her know.
No, let Neil know. But there's no obligation. You don't have to buy.
If you want to.
No, we have. I'd like to buy one, but you have to sign it for us.
She'll sign it.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Also for you. So should I give it to Neil? Yes. Dada like a Christmas Santa.
Santa.
He's a great fan of yours as well.
It was a lovely session. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
What a stone.
Tim Waterstone was our chancellor.